All right, let's move on to Leverkusen against Frankfurt. The Saturday Topspiel. And I actually think this is going to be a Topspiel. This is going to be a really fascinating game. Frankfurt have something to prove after getting torn to pieces by Bayern Munich last week. They have the next top team right in front of them, Leverkusen. Although they're 8 points behind Bayern, I don't think they're much worse than Bayern. And so this is going to be a really big task for Frankfurt, I think.
Yeah, it'll be a huge task. They've got to prove that they can bounce back. As we talked about on the main show this week, I was extremely disappointed in Frankfurt in the manner in which they just, I don't think capitulated is a strong word, because capitulated would suggest it was quite dramatic. They just basically did nothing against Bayern and just kind of slowly fell asleep in front of them, I think. And I think it'll be up to Frankfurt to prove that was a one-off game. That was a rabbit getting caught in the headlights at the Allianz Arena. And back home and in front of their own fans show that they still mean business, because they're coming up against a very good Leverkusen team that haven't conceded a goal, I think, in the last 3 games, and a team who are still emphatic away from home. I think the last time Leverkusen conceded or lost an away game, I think, was in 2023, which is crazy if you think about it. They're still unbeaten on the road this season despite everything. And Frankfurt will have to show that they're capable of causing an issue there. I guess in a sense you could probably argue that this is first versus second, second versus third rather, or third versus second, so I should say. And it's hard to imagine either of those teams losing those positions. Obviously Frankfurt are only 3 points ahead of Freiburg in 4th place, and then you got Mainz and Leipzig right behind them. But over the course of the season, I don't think we've really seen Frankfurt kind of drop off. In fact, I could probably quickly tell you if they've actually how many times they've moved away from 3rd place this season. They haven't. Well, here we go. Actually, they haven't been lower than 3rd in the Bundesliga since match day 8. There we go. So it's been a pretty steady campaign for Frankfurt, and I'm not entirely sure defeat here or failure to win will actually really cause too much of an upset there. So it'll be interesting to see what their approach to this game is. Whether they approach it thinking we have to win after what happened against Bayern. We have to catch up with Leverkusen. There's an 8-point gap, but we have to show a degree of pride. We're playing in front of our own fans, one of the rowdiest home crowds in the Bundesliga. Let's go out and win this game. Or if they'll be thinking, well, a draw will do us here, and it's Leverkusen, and Leverkusen are very good at home or very good on the road. Let's just see how it plays out, and then they basically try and play for a draw here, because I think it could easily play out either way, because we've seen them. I don't know. It's really weird. Frankfurt are obviously very good at home, but they have had these odd results. That 1-1 draw with Wolfsburg recently. They lost to Mainz. They drew with Augsburg as well, just before that as well. They do have a capacity to kind of, drop points when you least expect it, I suppose is the word I'm looking for. Now, Leverkusen are also capable of that away from home. They've dropped points to Bremen, dropped points to Bochum, dropped points to Wolfsburg. Was that 2-2 draw with RB Leipzig as well, and the 1-1 draw with Bayern. Well, they beat Kiel.
Leverkusen?
Yeah, they beat Kiel away from home 2-0 in that was the last away game actually.
Okay, I'm thinking maybe it was at home. Didn't Kiel take 2 points off Leverkusen this year?
Possibly. I can quickly check for you. Actually, I've got their thing.
It's been a long season, you can tell.
They drew 2-2 with Kiel back in October. Yeah, so they did. That was at home though. That was at home. But yeah,
that makes it even worse. Yeah, that's even worse.
Yeah, so they've struggled. That's fascinating. So yeah, Leverkusen obviously have that capacity to kind of drop points as well. But I do kind of feel like we're seeing maybe Leverkusen maybe pick up a bit of steam now, maybe. After that 0-0 draw with Bayern Munich, they went off and beat Kiel, quite convincingly there. And I think they'll probably feel a degree of having to kind of make sure they keep rumbling on with wins. So I think it should be a really tightly contested match. At least I'm hoping so.
Well, the backdrop on all this is that both teams are in Europe the following week, right? So this upcoming week, I guess. Um, and Leverkusen, of course, have 2 more matches against Bayern in the Champions League, which is, of course, going to be a draw that we're going to cover in depth. But it is also something I think if Leverkusen kind of are walking through the league right now, and they know they can't really catch up Bayern, but they can beat Bayern in the Champions League. And to outside perspective, that I'm not sure what that would do to Bayern Munich if they win the Bundesliga title, but they get knocked out in the Champions League by Bayer Leverkusen. What that would do for international perception, I think it would put an interesting twist to everything. Because then the story might
Well,
be,
Manu, let me tell you, don't ask Boris Becker, that's for sure. Have you seen this week?
oh no, what did he do? Yeah.
Uh, J- Jamie Carragher basically tweeted out that Vincent Kompany would be under huge pressure if Bayern got knocked out of the Champions League by Leverkusen, and Boris Becker responded saying he was talking nonsense. And the only task that Kompany had to do this year was to win the Bundesliga. To which Carragher then apologised. Which I must admit, I thought Boris Becker was talking nonsense, to be honest with you. But because I agree with you, I think Bayern could win the league title by 10 points, but if Leverkusen thump them in the Champions League, it'll be tricky.
Everyone abroad will think is like, yeah, they won the title, but aren't Leverkusen still the better team because they beat in the Champions League and they just gave up on the Bundesliga title and don't care? I mean, that's
Yeah,
a
exactly.
narrative that could develop abroad, or like people wouldn't even really pay attention to the fact that, but yeah, it's an interesting twist. Like, I think there's a ton on the line in that midweek game, and if Bayer Leverkusen feel they can't really win the title, that's going to impact these performances against teams like Eintracht Frankfurt, right? Because you already the headline, for example, in Kicker was that Hincapié is out, right, for suspension, but they're saying that's actually a good thing because it will force Alonso to rest him. And how many times have we seen Alonso rest players even in big matches because there was a more important fixture on the horizon? And this is these 2 Champions League games between Bayern and Bayer Leverkusen are going to be massive. These are going to be massive, massive games. These are going to be the size. I remember back in the 90s when Dortmund and Bayern played each other in the Champions League, and these were huge occasions, right? So
Mm.
yeah, I think we sort of maybe, we're going to cover it in depth, I think, maybe even on the main show. But this is something that I think is going to maybe overshadow everything that's going to happen in German football over the early weeks of March.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think it wouldn't surprise me if obviously both clubs took it far more seriously, same with Bayern Munich. Um, and we've seen with Leverkusen time and time again, as you said, Alonso has prioritised the Champions League over just about anything else, really, to a kind of sickening degree, to be honest with you, where, um, you know, we've seen players get dropped and Florian Wirtz basically have to play up front on his own for much of the season. Poor guy. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It wouldn't surprise me. I'd be interested to see who gets dropped because they've now got
Yeah.
Boniface and Patrick Schick back, so they should have plenty of options there. Although I'm just double checking. Yeah, they should have all those players in the team. So yeah, we'll have to kind of wait and see what happens there. But yeah, it'll be an interesting match. It's a bit of a toss up, to be honest with you. It's a very good home side against a very good away side. So it should be a good match, and yeah, we'll just have to wait to see what happens. But it's a very, very difficult one to call, and maybe one that's not entirely important right now in the Bundesliga side. I don't know I don't know if we can say that, but that's how it feels a little bit. Which seems silly that we're talking about it on the show today, but it's important, but maybe not directly important to the league table itself.
Well, Frankfurt, right? They are now only 3 points ahead of Freiburg, 4 points ahead of Mainz, 4 points ahead of Leipzig. Is probably the team that Frankfurt want to keep the gap to. Dortmund somewhere back there with 32, right? These are the teams that Frankfurt are fights for the Champions League. But they too have a big fixture coming up against Ajax on Thursday, right? A little bit more time for them than for Leverkusen, but we all know how Frankfurt have won the Europa League recently, but they've also reached a final recently. They always go deep in these international competitions. They're a very good cup team. And they're a team that, they're a team also where the fans travel in not the thousands, but the tens of thousands. We all remember that invasion in Barcelona, right? And so, this is a club that takes these European nights extremely seriously. And So, you have that weird kind of balance for them too, that, well, on the one hand, we're playing Leverkusen. We want to beat them. We want to keep that gaps because I think Frankfurt are ready and ripe to become a Champions League club, right? Like we mentioned the history that they had playing these many years in the Europa League quite successfully, and it feels like they're on the verge of graduating to that next level. But that too is the backdrop here, right?
Mm.
And so, yeah, I think it's kind of like this interesting tightrope that a lot of these clubs are walking at the moment. And to add another interesting, and maybe to talk a little bit about the tactical and how these two teams are going to approach it. And I have a really interesting stat for you here. So these are the two best counter-attacking teams in the league.
Mm.
Frankfurt have scored 10 counter-attacking goals, and Leverkusen have scored 8 counter-attacking goals. So are we going to just see each team try to give the other team the ball here?
Yeah, maybe. Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see. I mean, sometimes we get two counter-attacking teams that can mean both of them just defend all day, and no one
Yeah.
really wants to no one really wants to be on the front foot. Um, I don't know. I mean, I'm really looking forward to seeing, hopefully, Mario Götze back in this Frankfurt team because I think they really missed him in that Bayern game. As I said, on the main show, I thought Larson was really disappointing in the middle of the park there. I think maybe even Y up front, the striker they signed from Marseille. I thought he came on and he made a real nuisance of himself against that Bayern defence. So it'll be good if we can see him and Götze maybe behind Hugo Ekitike. We might see a bit more impetus in that lineup because, aside from maybe a few half chances, it just didn't really feel like Frankfurt kind of created a lot, and it felt like for much of the game they were kind of waiting on Hugo Ekitike or maybe even Chano Zone to kind of create something out of nothing. And I just feel like Ekitike needs a lot more support, and hopefully he'll get that from Mahe and Götze as well. And yeah, we'll have to kind of wait to see how Leverkusen set up. As you said, they'll be out without Hincapié, but they've obviously got three decent defenders in there. Tapsoba's good, Taz good. Mukiele is a player who's kind of, I thought, blown hot and cold this season, to be honest with you. So there might be an opportunity there for Frankfurt to kind of cause some problems because Ekitike, I think, has looked superb even though he didn't score in the last game. But yeah, it should be a more or less straightforward, without one or two players, strongest 11 from both teams, unless, of course, either manager chooses to drop players ahead of the Europa League and Champions League games. But yeah, I guess we'll wait and see what happens.
Yeah, an interesting wrinkle too is, and Kicker actually made this a big story, is that 4 players on this Frankfurt side are going to fast for Ramadan, which starts on Friday. Which is always, I mean, we have these stories every year, right? That certain players decide to fast during the day and then they break fast with sunset, right? That is the rule around Ramadan. I always find that fascinating that the way players navigate that because there's all sorts of exception clauses too that sometimes professionals are allowed to take up that time back later on if they wish to do so. But yeah, Hugo Ekitike is one of them, and the story around it is that he did it last year, and it was also a time when he struggled a little bit with fitness. So it is an interesting wrinkle. Not sure how much it's going to impact this initial game. As I said, it starts on Friday, and then of course Saturday is the first day of Ramadan or first full day of Ramadan. Yeah. If you have these players in your squad, you got to respect it. But it's also always something I think that impacts certain clubs in some ways. So yeah, interesting.